Hey up YouTube. So in this video today, it's going to be another part of the Starting a Business series, and I want to talk to you about admitting when you're wrong. And I think when you're in your 20s, probably as you start going, early 20s, late 20s, I think it's the worst thing you can do, isn't it? I think it's, to sort of quote, it makes me sound like, a bit of an old fuddy-duddy. It's definitely a young person thing, isn't it? And I think as you get older, there's times where it's almost beneficial, to when to admit to when you're wrong, And even there's times where, I'm not saying it's advisable, but there's times when to back down, when to admit you're wrong, in the wrong, when to apologise. And in this video I want to just have a chat with that. So there's been times where I've buggered up and I've had to say, I was in the wrong, I didn't, this went wrong, this happened, it didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. And and I think I always say this, honesty is the best policy. I think don't bullshit people, don't smoke screen people, don't gaslight them. If you're wrong, you're wrong, and it's just as I find it easier. And there has been times, there's been ways, or there's been times where I've said we'll do it this way around, and actually it's been one of those where it would have been better to do it the other way around. Just in sort of order of works and all that sort of stuff. I've had to go back and not eat humble pie. Luckily, most of mine has been where I've sort of underestimated a little bit. So I've had it before where I did a power washing job for somebody, and it was one of them where I says to her that looks nice and straightforward, and she was almost nudging me and saying, well, it took the previous person a couple of days to do it. And I'm like, no, I said it'll be fine. And basically, it wasn't a problem with the property. The problem was the water pressure was absolutely dire at this lady's property. It was awful. And it was one where I filled my barrel up. So I've got a big brown wheelie bin, started filling that up, put my while got all the stuff out, had a cup of tea with the lady, and I went back, and literally it was just over half full and the water was just trickling out. And I thought, bloody hell, it's going to take me ages. And it did. Anybody that's used a barrel fed water pressure washer and it's got slow water feed, it's a nightmare. It took me ages, it really did. And then again, it all happened in one job where I said in the end, I saw the neighbour and he looked an approachable bloke, and I says to him, I says, look mate, I says, is there any chance I can use your water for a few hours? I says, if it is that you want something in return, or you want me to do a bit of power washing for you, I said, I don't mind at all. And he says, no problem at all. And with the use of his water and the lady's water, actually it went from a nightmare job to, actually it wasn't that bad. It didn't take me 2 days, as the lady had said, but if it wasn't for that neighbour coming back, it would have probably took me 2 days, just because the water pressure was so crap. So I did have to sort of think about that. But the thing where I've had to admit I was in the wrong and eat a little bit of humble pie was the neighbour said to me, he said, do you want me moving the car for you? I says, no, it's all right, I've done by your car and I'm doing away from it now. He says, okay, no problem. Anyway, I was power washing and a neighbour come out, and he looked at me and then he pointed at his car and he rubbed his hand down it. And what had happened is I was using the surface cleaner or a wand on the other side of the property, all the shit that had kicked up, and it was a windy day, It didn't carry all of it, but what it did do was it carried the really fine, sort of like a mist almost, and it had blew it all over this bloke's car. And he's just had it, you know, well, he said it was a clean car beforehand, and it wasn't now. And I bet he just thought, fuck, you know, I've let this bloke use my water, I've not asked for anything for it. I asked if I could move my car, and he says no, and now he's shit it up. So he didn't look very happy. And like I said, I always think it's best to sort of admit it. I just said, Luke, I says, I am ever so sorry. I says, I could, you know, eat a bit of humble pie here. I says, Luke, I said, I can see from how, you know, your point of view, I've used your water and I've messed your car up. I says, what will it take to rectify this situation? And he just says, Luke, he says, will you be able to wash my car for me? I says, yeah. I said, it's no problem. I said, if you get the stuff that you want me to use, you know, I will use it and I will wash your car. And I washed it and I dried it all off. And he come out and he was happy with it. And he said, I says, Luke, is there anything else, you know? And he says, no. He says, you've put it right. He says, as for the water, it's a favour to the neighbour more than it is to you. And he wasn't rude, right? You know, there was no animosity, but it was definitely a case of, you know, admitting I was in the wrong. I should have asked him to, and ever since then, I've always been so careful. Like I said, I was at the other end of the property, so it must have just blew. Anyway, things happen. As I said, you know, I think I found it's easier to sort of see it from both sides and sort of see the bigger picture, that sometimes it's beneficial to just admit you're in the wrong and get it, you know, nip it in. So like, God, like ornaments, I broke a load. You know, the amount of lights I've cut through, God, ornaments I've knocked over. I did one I think it was last year, and this bloke had this like old like football mascot gnome sort of thing, and the little bugger had his thumb up like that, and as I think I was blowing the clippings away, and I just turned with the blower, I just knocked his thumb off. I knocked his whole hand off. I thought, bloody hell. I thought, well, what do I do? And, you know, I'm not saying other people would do nothing. Other people might do nothing and pretend they just didn't notice it. Like I said, it was one of them where it didn't even knock the gnome over. It just knocked his hand off. It just clipped it off. So I just rung him up. I just said, look, mate, and he says to me, he says, oh, it is my, I should take it in over winter, but, you know, my dad got me that. And I says, Luke, I says, are you okay if I repair it for you? So I took it back home and I just super glued it and padded the super glue out with some baking soda just to reinforce, and I fixed it. Okay, it's got a bit of a collar around it where the repair was, but this bloke was happy with that, and ever since then I've been happy. You know, he's still got his thumb in the air, the little bugger has. So you've just got to be careful. Now, there's been times where I've also, with customers, they've, like, I've got one bloke and he's got his own way of, so he says to me, he says, I want you to, I went to him at like start of March and his lawn needed cutting. I says, oh, this lawn's quite long. He said, I says, I'll get your boots. He said, oh no. He said, I'm going to get the feed put down first. I says, and then you can cut it. I says, well, I says, I think I says it needs to be cut beforehand. He says, no. He says the feed sits on the leaf and gets absorbed in, and he's just using Miracle Grow. And now I could be wrong here, and I'm not going to have it out with an 80-year-old bloke. I could be wrong. As far as I know, the granular feed, the idea is it goes onto the ground and gets absorbed into the ground. You don't really want it sitting on a leaf because it could burn it, or it could say sit on the leaf and not actually penetrate down to where the moss is, so it's sort of not doing the job it needs to do. So I sort of, you know, thought to myself, so I just thought to myself, right, you know, and this bloke was adamant on it. he was adamant, and then it ended up where didn't end up getting cut till April, but it didn't get, I think he had it cut in April and then it got fed, and so it got done the right way round in the end. But it did take a while for that to happen, and like I said, it's one of them where you have to sort of compromise. So am I going to sort of have it out and say, no, I believed I was in the right? I could be wrong, tell me. You know, I've never used Miracle Grow. I could be wrong. It could say that it needs to, you know, best practice to cut the grass. Like I said, I could be wrong. But, you know, I'd be open to admit it. But in my head, I thought, because this ended up being where the grass was delayed for a month, so it was super long. It looked really messy. It was so much so that when I went, there was relatives there, and they actually made a comment, and it didn't annoy me, but they said, oh, your garden's ever so overgrown. And they're saying that while the gardener's here, and I'm saying to myself, well, I think it's not up to me. It isn't. So, as I said, sometimes customers are in the wrong, but it's how you handle it. You could try and bring them round to your way of thinking, but with this chap, steadfast. So you've just got to let him get on with it sometimes. But have a good day, guys. As usual, keep on gardening.